That long blonde hair floated under the spotlight, and the entire Tampa stadium went silent. Not because they were startled, not because they were confused, but because every single person in that room, in that exact same moment, couldn't breathe. Millions of ARMY around the world already know this person. They know his voice, they know his movements. But that night in Tampa, something was different. Something that made even longtime fans stop, narrow their eyes, and ask, who is this really? Is this a person or a god? And the most shocking part? That was only the first minute of the show. Because what happened after that, especially one small moment that almost everyone missed, is what ended up surpassing millions of views in just a matter of hours. Stay here, because I'm gonna break down everything from the second Jimin stepped onto that stage to the hidden details behind the freestyle dance that the entire internet is now talking about. Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. If you're the kind of ARMY who likes to think deeply, not just a casual fan who squeals and moves on, then you are in the right place. We don't just say he's so handsome and call it a day. We break things down. We analyze. We look for the meaning behind every moment. If this is your first time here and you're enjoying this kind of content, consider subscribing. It's free, and you'll always be the first to know when something important happens in the world of Jimin and BTS. Alright, let's get into it. For anyone who might not have the full context, here's what you need to know. Jimin performed in Tampa, United States as part of his solo tour run. This wasn't his first performance in America, but fans who were there that night said it felt like an entirely new chapter. What had people talking even before he stepped foot on stage was his hair. Long, golden blonde, flowing freely, exactly like the era ARMY nicknamed Northern Duke. A title born from the combination of Jimin's aristocratic look, that sharpness, that elegance, and an aura that is genuinely very difficult to put into words. The show opened with two tracks, Hooligan and Run BTS, both performed in a brand new costume no one had seen before. But out of everything that happened that night, one segment ended up being the most talked about. The freestyle dance during FYA. No choreography, no rules, completely free. And the fan cam from that moment, millions of views in one night. Why? That's exactly what we're going to get into right now. Imagine you're there. Your seat has been soaked in sweat for the past hour from the long lines outside. But the moment the stage lights cut off and the intro music begins to play, all of that disappears. Jimin appears. And in that second, everyone knows tonight is a night they will remember for the rest of their lives. Hooligan opens with a heavy, intense, dark energy. His new costume, a sharp silhouette in contrasting tones, looks as though it was designed specifically to capture the duality that has always defined Jimin. Fragile but powerful, gentle but burning. The movement in the first song feels more aggressive than previous versions, not in a rough way, but in the sense of full force. Every stomp, every pivot, every pause, all deliberate, all calculated. Jimin has never danced carelessly, and anyone who has followed his career long enough will recognize that immediately. Then comes Run BTS, and if Hooligan is a storm at midnight, then Run BTS is the lightning inside it. The dance lines in this song, already known as one of the most technically demanding and stamina-heavy in his catalog, were executed by Jimin with the kind of precision that left many audience members simply standing with their mouths open. One fan in the third row even shared a video of their own reaction face, and that went viral too, because their expression, it said everything that everyone in that room was feeling. On social media, the reaction exploded even before the concert was over. Jimin Tampa-related hashtags entered global trending on X, Twitter, within less than 30 minutes of the show starting. Not just because the performance was stunning, but because there was something more personal than usual that night. Many fans who were there reported that Jimin seemed more open emotionally, more frequent smiles, more intense eye contact with the crowd. There were several moments where he paused at the edge of the stage, looked out at the audience, and his expression, hard to describe, but the fans who were there said it. It felt like someone who is genuinely present, not just physically, but in soul. And that is the difference between a great performance and a performance that makes people cry without knowing why. This is the part that rarely gets talked about. And this is what makes the Tampa moment different from any concert before it. First, the way Jimin handled his hair on stage. This might sound trivial, but if you watch the fan cam carefully, there are multiple times where Jimin pushes his hair back, not by accident, but as part of his expression. That's not choreography, that's a personal gesture, a movement that comes from someone who is genuinely comfortable in their own skin. And if you remember earlier eras, when Jimin still seemed to approach his performances in a much more defensive, careful way, the contrast is striking. That night in Tampa, Jimin looked like someone who had finally made peace with himself. Second, there is one transition in Hooligan that almost no one caught. Right at the bridge of the song, there is an 8 count where Jimin shifts his posture from something extremely powerful to something almost whisper quiet. And the speed of that transition, the smoothness of that contrast, is a technique that can only be executed by a dancer with an exceptionally high level of body control. Several professional choreographers who watched the fan cam and commented on social media called it one of the finest technical executions they had ever seen in a live performance format. Third, the moment just before FYA began. Before the freestyle dance started, there was 1 second, just 1 second, where Jimin stood in the center of the stage, took a breath, and closed his eyes. Many people assumed it was part of the choreography, but people who have followed him long enough know that is a ritual. Jimin always does that before the most personal, most honest moments. It's not a performance, it's preparation. But wait, because everything I've told you so far, the new costume, the perfect dance lines, the iconic hair, that's only half the story. What's even more surprising is what happened during FYA. And this is the part that almost never gets discussed outside of professional dancer communities. When Jimin entered the freestyle segment, where there is no set choreography, no memorized counts, no movement guide to follow, that is when you truly see who someone is as a dancer. You can't fake it in freestyle. You can't hide anything. Every insecurity, every hesitation, every doubt, it all shows up right there. And Jimin? He was free, completely, entirely free. His movement in that moment didn't look like an idol performing a set, it looked like someone who was playing in the most pure sense of that word. Spontaneous, fluid, alive. The fan cam from that moment surpassed 1 million views in just a few hours. By the time this video was made, the number had gone far beyond that. Why? Because ARMY wasn't just watching an idol dance, they were watching someone who was truly, completely liberated. To truly understand why the Tampa moment carries so much weight, we need to step back a little. Jimin debuted with BTS in 2013. From day one, he was already known as an extraordinary dancer, but not the type of dancer who let himself be seen enjoying the stage openly. Jimin always appeared serious, disciplined, perfectionist. There are many interviews from his early days where Jimin spoke about the insecurities he carried, whether his body was good enough, whether his movements were precise enough, whether his voice deserved to be heard. Jimin once said directly that there were periods where he could barely enjoy being on stage because he was too busy evaluating himself. That is a heavy weight to carry, and it showed if you compare his performances from 2013, 2015, even 2018 with what you see in Tampa that night. There is a very clear shift, not just technically, which has grown exponentially, but emotionally. There is a peace now in Jimin's face on stage that used to be very rarely visible. And that long blonde hair, which ARMY refers to as the Northern Duke era, is not just an aesthetic choice. For many fans who have followed his journey from the beginning, it is a symbol of someone who has finally found the version of himself that he chose, not the version shaped by other people's expectations. When Jimin first appeared in this look, the ARMY reaction was explosive, not just because of how he looked, though that too, undeniably, but because there was something in his presence that felt more authentic than before. Like someone who had finally found clothes that truly fit, not because the style was beautiful, but because they were genuinely his. And that night in Tampa, with Northern Duke back in full-on that stage, that feeling returned with twice the intensity.
I want you to picture one moment. The FYA music begins. No counts, no choreographer nodding from behind the curtain, no right or wrong. Just Jimin, the stage, and tens of thousands of eyes watching. And he moves, not like an idol running through a routine, but like water following the course of a river. Natural, unpredictable, beautiful not because it was planned, but precisely because it wasn't. There is one moment in the middle of that freestyle that has been replayed hundreds of times by thousands of people around the world, where Jimin transitions from something enormously powerful into something that feels almost like silence in motion, slow, like the last exhale before dawn, and then full force again. That contrast, that spontaneity, the honesty in every curve of his body, that is what made millions of people press replay. Not because the technique was perfect, though that's also true, but because in those 90 seconds of freestyle, Jimin communicated something that cannot be put into words. That this is someone who has found his freedom, and he is sharing that freedom with all of us. Fans who were there that night wrote across multiple platforms that they left the venue with a feeling they couldn't quite explain. Not just happy, but full, like they had witnessed something rare. A performance that didn't just entertain, but touched something deep. And for a pop concert, that is not a small thing. That is something very, very few artists are capable of doing. Jimin did it with his blonde hair flowing and a brand new costume that the media hadn't even had time to photograph properly. Because a moment like that doesn't need media preparation. A moment like that arrives on its own, and everyone in that room knew they were watching it. So what actually happened in Tampa that night? More than just a concert, more than just a great set list, a new costume, or hair that was too perfect to ignore. What happened was an artist who for years carried an enormous weight of perfectionism stood on that stage and chose to simply be, fully present, no filter, no mask, no distance between himself and his audience. And in an entertainment world increasingly filled with calculation and strategy, that is something incredibly rare. Northern Duke is not just a name fans gave to a hairstyle. It is the way ARMY describes the purest version of Jimin, someone who carries elegance not because he was trained to, but because it was already inside him all along, and he finally allowed it to come out completely. And we, watching from the stadium or from the screens in our hands in different corners of the world, we all felt it at the same time. That is the power of an honest performance, and that is what Jimin gave us in Tampa. Now, the question for you, out of everything I talked about today, which moment hit you the hardest? Was it the viral freestyle dance, the new costume no one had seen before, or maybe that small detail I mentioned, that one single second where Jimin closed his eyes before performing? Write it in the comments. I read every single one, and you might end up being featured in the next video. If this video made you see Jimin in a different way, or reminded you exactly why you fell for him in the first place, share it with a fellow ARMY who needs that reminder. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now is the time. The button is right there. One click. See you in the next one. Take care of yourselves, and never stop loving art that is honest.